Hi and welcome to the TechF1 show. In this episode we'll be looking back at Spa-Francorchamps. That's the circuit that the F1 teams have just visited. It's a 7-kilometre circuit that's split up into 3 sectors. Sectors 1 and 3 are both low downforce, whereas the sector 2 is more of a higher downforce setup. So there's obviously compromise made by the teams in regards to their arranged aero configurations. So if we first have a look at Red Bull Racing. Obviously this particular team have obviously been criticised in the past for their adoption of perhaps too much downforce, especially at circuits like Monza and Spa, where there has to be a bit of compromise. And so the team themselves took a couple of new rear wings to the circuit at Spa. This first picture here, taken by Sutton Images, is of a wing that will perhaps see will actually be seen at Monza rather than at Spa. They only used it through first practice 1 and 2, and I actually noticed at the time, which if you follow my Twitter feed you'll have noticed this picture. If we have a look at the magnified image just here, we can see that there's no louvers in the end plates, and those louvers are there to normally just to control the vortices that are sent off the rear of the wing. So they control the vortices and decrease the drag on the rear wing. The rear wing that the team actually used, and Mark Webber used first off in free practice 3, was this particular wing. It's a little bit more higher downforce, so obviously the team had to compromise and for sector 2 increase the amount of downforce that the team were needing. And this particular wing obviously has the 3 louvers in the end of the end plate, so it's obvious to see the difference that's available to the team. Obviously that you'll have a little bit more drag because of those, but you obviously have to take the drag with the extra downforce that you need for sector 2. The team also took a new nose to Spa. Obviously when you're having to set up aero configuration wise the car, you have to think about both ends of the car. You can't just simply take downforce off at the rear because you're going to have unbalance what's going on at the front. So the new front wing and nose configuration that was taken to Spa featured a much slimmer section to the nose, and the FOM cameras, Formula 1 management cameras, were actually placed in a more neutral position. As of late, Red Bull have been using them in what I call the hammerhead position, which is on the frontal section of the nose here and actually generates a bit more front end downforce. And what also was missing from the Red Bull nose this time around is the little pelican belly that fits underneath the nose, and that obviously helps with the airflow onwards from there. The team, as you can see here from this particular shot, you can see the hammerhead position that I've just been talking about. So you've got the FOM cameras on the ends of the front here. I just thought to show that so that you've got some idea as to the differences that's involved. Something else that you might notice from this particular picture is a difference that the team run, which is the little V groove in the centre of the wing. Now we don't see that on the wing that was used at Spa, and that's just another compromise that the team take forward, and that little V groove there, as I say, on this higher downforce wing will reduce the drag because it allows the airflow to go through the gap there. Moving on to Mercedes. Now obviously this team have come forward since the whole tyre debacle that we had at Barcelona, where the team were caught testing with the tyres. Obviously they'll say that wasn't something that's helped them to progress, and I don't think it really is. I think it's just more of a case of them understanding the tyres, and Mercedes have really gained when it comes to the 2012 construction that we've seen the teams move to. They've also made some pretty decent steps forward. Ross Brawn alluded to in an interview with Eddie Jordan prior to the race that it's the small bits that have allowed Mercedes to make that leap forward, instead of what they were looking for at the start of the season were big elements that were causing them problems. So for Spa, we see that the team who adopted the Pelican underbelly for the last race have taken that away, so it allows a more cleaner airflow to the rear of the car and obviously reduces a little bit of drag. That's the little Pelican belly that we can see just there that the team used at Hungary. I thought I'd just show you this picture here. It just proves how the what Mercedes have been doing over the last few years, well this year particularly, they obviously started out very much like McLaren with a very basic front wing setup. Since the rules have come in 2009, Mercedes hadn't really changed their front wing design ethos pretty much since the Brawn days, so they've been running a fairly standard configuration front wing. And now we can see just how many tiers that they're running, which is pretty much in line with what we see Ferrari and Red Bull doing. So we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tiers. Just helps with airflow, attachment, increases the downforce slightly, but it's all to do with managing vortices to the rear of the car and increasing the downforce at the rear, but also how the airflow goes outbound around the tyre. So this is Mercedes' new rear wing for Spa. You will see that there's actually a nuanced difference compared to their other style wing, and that is that in the main plane and in the top flap itself. So this is the main plane and this is the top flap. You'll see at the outer side we've got a much longer chord than we have in the central section. Now that's the compromise that I talked about earlier, where you have to basically make a compromise between low downforce and high downforce setups. So there may have been this for Spa, for Monza, sorry, and we might see a much more skinny rear wing. This I think was just more of a Spa specific rear wing, and just to cater for the two differences in technicality of that particular circuit. Also for the rear wing, there's something that other teams have been playing around with for, well, some of them for a couple of seasons, but mainly this season it's been an area that other teams have caught up with. Firstly, you've got the little tyre wake slot, which is not new for this race, but it is fairly new for Mercedes. I think they introduced it at Nürburgring, and basically that helps to manage the airflow that comes off of the rear wheels, and it allows it to go inbound, just taking some of the pressure or wake off of the end plate itself. But the interesting and new part that we can see on this particular rear wing is the two little fins just here in the end plates, and they help to control the vortices that come off of the rear wing, just making it a much more efficient rear wing. We've seen McLaren do it for a number of years. Ferrari have been doing it since last year, and other teams have obviously dabbled with it. Lotus have serrated versions, so that theirs help a bit more in yaw. Right, moving on to Ferrari, and if we have a look at their new front wing, basically. The new front wing is just a nuanced difference. Again, it's just purely down to the way that the air flow is needed to work for Spa. Much more to do with reducing downforce on the front wing and balancing with what's going on at the rear. So all that you will really see as a difference on this particular rear wing, front wing, is the top flap here. This section across the top has basically been cut down to allow the airflow to come through. It usually comes up much higher towards the other outer section of the flap just there. And moving on to the rear wing. Now, again, Ferrari took two wings just like Red Bull did to Spa. This is their low downforce configuration, and it's probably the rear wing that we'll see them use at Monza. And the reason that I'm talking about them testing these particular wings but not running them at Spa is the fact that it gives them the chance to test out this particular configuration before they get to Monza, so they can work out whether it's actually going to do the job that it's supposed to do at Monza. It's not quite as aggressive in terms of low downforce as the Red Bull version. That's because you can see that the angle of attack is a bit steeper, and it allows them to run the end plate louvers to reduce the downforce there. So again, it's more of a compromised wing compared to the Red Bull, which in reality, the one that I showed you first off, is a very low downforce setup, moving perhaps quite closely towards what we'd see on a GP2 car. Here we go, another little shot of the rear wing here of the Ferrari, and it shows a closer up of those louvers I mentioned that help to control the vortices that create drag off the rear end of the wing there. This is the actual wing that was run for the race, and as you can see, the actual angle of attack is much steeper. It's not set at its highest setting, because as you can see just here, this is where the highest setting would normally run at. Again, if you can just see in front of the trailing edge slats that Ferrari run here. We've also got the little strikes that we just saw on the Mercedes rear wing. Moving on to Lotus. Now Lotus actually came out before Spa and said that they would bring a new car to the Spa Grand Prix, and that would be a long wheelbase version of the E21. It's now been postponed to Monza, and the long wheelbase version is somewhere around 10 to 12 centimetres longer. And the reason that they're introducing that is to do with their simulator work. Basically, it will allow them to see if the simulator and the way that the drivers react with the simulator in loop actually corresponds with what the drivers see out on track. Lotus have kind of fallen behind over the last few races, and Kimi's retirement won't have helped them either, but I think this new long wheelbase version might help them manage the tyres a little better. Obviously their car was set up based upon the 2013 construction tyres, and so they're rectifying the situation now that we're back with 2012 construction. They also introduced a raft of upgrades to the side pod at Spa, and that was designed to aid in the way that the airflow that comes off the front wheel then affects the side pod itself. Now, just quickly, the side pod on the Lotus and the McLaren is much different to some of the other teams in the fact that they've made theirs a two-tier side pod, and the frontal section here houses the side impact protection bars just here, and then you have a little step away to the side pod inlet itself. And the reason for that is that it allows a more aggressive section underneath the side pod to allow more airflow in and around the side pod. A design decision that was used on the Lotus E20, and I think McLaren saw that and tried to gain in those areas as well. But what was new here for Lotus is the new vortex generators above the side pod inlet, and we've also got the little cockpit fins. Usually the mirror would be attached just around here, but it wasn't whilst this picture was taken at the build-up. Now these little fins here and the vortex generators help to manage the airflow, the downwash that goes over the back of the side pod and down towards the exhaust. And with the new construction of tyres, it seems that Lotus wanted to adjust the way in which that airflow then met with the exhaust. So that's why they've changed to the vortex generators above here instead of having a full-length cockpit fan just popping out there. Drag reduction device. Lotus have been running this since before Spa 2012 in practice sessions, and only run it once during a race, and they're the only ones to have run it once during a race, and that was at Silverstone in 2013 on Kimi Raikkonen's car. Drag reduction device is effectively a passive device that stalls at a speed threshold. It's very difficult for the teams to manage and to get right. Obviously Mercedes have toyed around with it, as have Sauber, and a couple of other teams have had it on the back burner and perhaps not brought it to the car because they realise the difficulties that it causes to get it to actually operate fully. Here's the drag reduction device installed at the rear of the car, and what you've got here is the periscope section and the extension of the engine cover that goes out underneath the specifically designed monkey seat. The periscope has a section cut out at the back here to allow for the stall angle to be reduced, so basically air flows out of here and controls the level of stall that you get from the drag reduction device. This is actually a little bit taller. It's part of the shot was taken during setup, and basically what we have happen is if we can imagine airflow coming in through the ears that we saw just now on the engine cover and through the engine cover, at a certain speed threshold this area here becomes blocked, i.e. there's too much air to be extracted out of the exhaust section just here. The exhaust section of the engine cover, that is, not the exhaust itself. And basically the airflow then will come up the periscope. Now, as I mentioned, these holes that have been put in the back here will slow down the effect so that it becomes minimised and you don't have such a steep stall angle. It's something that they introduced at the Young Drivers Test to try and get DRD to the car. DRD wasn't run at Spa again by Lotus, and that was purely because the team tried it through free practice 1. Weather conditions wasn't good enough, so they couldn't get it on the car for long enough, and they decided that perhaps they needed the setup time decided to abandon it as usual and kick on with the rest of their setup for the weekend. So that what they actually did run then was perhaps a Montreal spec rear wing. It may have been Spa specific and bought as a backup, but it looks very much like the Montreal rear wing to me, which again is not quite as high downforce as you would have seen with the drag reduction device, because you can leverage one versus the other. A bit of extra downforce taken off then by the drag reduction device as you get up to the speed threshold. So this is a bit of a shallower rear wing. As we can see here, the little vortex generators on the cockpit side pod just here, and the ones underneath the wing mirror here are on the cockpit side. Right, Kimi's failure, brake failure, and the reason he retired from the race, and I think that was his 38th race, consecutive race that he would have completed without a failure. Obviously he didn't. Records held by Nick Heidfeld, which I believe is 41 consecutive races without a retirement, so he's almost on for that. Just as an explanation as to how that actually came about and what the problem was, if we have a look at the bare brake duct here, i.e. without the wheel on, the red marker that I've popped on here is to indicate where the tyre would normally sit. So this is what is exposed as the inlet and where the air actually goes inside the wheel there. Once you get into the interior of the inlet, you've then got another 3 access points. The lower one here will blow out of this section here and blow the outer part of the rear, the ring. And the 2 inner sections are here to control the temperature of both the disc and the caliper. And that is where the heat management problem came around for Kimi Raikkonen. It was believed that a tear-off actually entered the inlet and was blocking off this section, so it got to a point whereby it was overheating that particular brake, and when they came in for the first pit stop, the guys actually managed to free it off, got it out of the inlet, but the damage at that point was already done. Kimi Raikkonen obviously proceeded for the second stint, but the heat was already latent in the brake itself, and there was just about no way of actually cooling that down any further. Another little detail that I wanted to mention about on Lotus, this has been here I think now for 2 races, but I haven't covered it because it's such a minute detail, but as we know, those are the things that make up F1, all those small minor details, and that is this little triangular winglet on the end of the floor here. That little winglet there will stop outbound airflow entering towards the tyre squirt slot, and again it will also stop migration of the airflow going out this way. Just a minor detail, but I thought I'd mention it as it's quite an interesting little add-on. Moving over to Sauber, and also their drag reduction device made another showing, just like the Lotus one did. Again, it was only used in free practice 1, and the team, free practice 1, free practice 2, they assessed it on the Friday and at one point thought that they would actually run it on the car, but they decided that again, like Lotus, with too much wet running, they just couldn't gamble on drag reduction device. Their device is much simpler than the Lotus version, much easier to install and take off the car. The ears are part of the engine cover rather than being bonded to the chassis like we see on the Lotus, and the little periscope that goes underneath the spoon wing, which made another re-entry back onto the car, is all designed to come off rather quickly. As we can see in this next picture, what that Sutton got for us, this is the periscope being installed onto the under the side of the rear wing, which is where the stall happens. It's quite a basic setup. It's obviously still as complicated as the Lotus version to get right, but I don't think they're quite leveraging the level of drag reduction or indeed additional downforce from the rear wing that Lotus were trying to do. Right, a new wing, which is quite a thing for Sauber. They don't have them very often, so we saw a new wing at Spa. They have nuance changes, but nothing too major. Their new front wing here features a new cascade section. This is the cascade. It's the little winglet section that comes off the end plate and sits in front of the flaps. The cascade helps with airflow up and around the front wheel, and this particular one this new particular cascade has a curved element that fits around here, a new vertical vein in the centre, and a much shallower angle of attack on the cascade itself. If we look at the pre-Spa specification, they usually run with twin cascades, so it's a very small cascade on the end of the main cascade, and they also normally have a horizontal blade that fits in the middle of the cascade. So it's a bit of a change up for the team in Spa, and obviously to cater perhaps for the 2012 construction tyre change, and something that I think we'll see the team running again in the future. Moving on to McLaren, obviously a team that have struggled towards the start of the season, even struggling against the likes of Force India, unfortunately. They made some drastic changes to the MP428 at the start of the season, which they had to backtrack through pre-season testing because they realised that they'd made errors that they couldn't rectify with that particular tyre construction. And now we're back with the 2012 construction. The team have reverted to what was almost the pre-season setup. One of those particular items is these triple element turning vanes underneath the nose and chassis. When the team went to Australia, they actually abandoned these, citing the fact that they were having problems accessing the pull rod front suspension that they'd been running. Those in the know knew that that was a bit of a false alarm, and what they did was they moved their turning vanes forward to the nose, underneath the nose section rather than underneath the chassis, and that just proved that they were having problems with the airflow underneath the nose. Such a drastic change for McLaren, and obviously they're still working on that particular situation. So as I mentioned, McLaren are the other team that have got their two-tier arrangement on the side pod, much like Lotus on their E20 and E21, and McLaren here have the pitot tube arrangement at the bottom of the side pod, and they're just assessing what's going on airflow wise in front and around this section of the side pod. Helps them work out if the wind tunnel and the CFD that they're using is correlating with the information that's been shown on the car, and obviously helps them understand the difference and relationship between the 2013 early construction tyres and the switchback that we're on now to the 2012 construction tyres. McLaren took a new rear wing to Spa, something we haven't seen them do this season so far. It's very much a copy of what we saw them use in 2012 at Spa, which obviously they were very dominant with Jenson Button's win there. It's a lower downforce setup, and you see a much shallower angle of attack, but again they're leveraging much more for sector 2 in terms of downforce from the rear wing than perhaps some of the teams like Red Bull tried with a much skinnier version of the rear wing. Here we see again the lower downforce rear wing, that you can see the quite shallow angle of attack. But what I actually want to highlight in this picture is obviously not only the end plate that we've talked about with Mercedes, where you see the strikes on the end to control vortices, and the tyre wake slot in the end of the end plate just there, but something new for McLaren. They even normally run quite a steep angle of attack on their monkey seat, which is the monkey seat is the Y75 winglet that we see adorn the central section of the car just here, or they run with a curved element in the central portion of the beam wing just there. And what they had for Spa was this new arrangement, and it's basically just a flick up in the centre. It's a hybrid between what I would call a low version monkey seat and just a straightforward section in the monkey seat like we normally see. Other teams run with that arrangement. Lotus have tried that arrangement, especially when they were on the E20. We don't see it so much on the E21, but they have got a beam wing in that configuration, and as we can see there's quite a steep angle of attack on that particular section, trying to leverage downforce from the lower end of the car rather than just totally at the top of the rear wing. Right, for this episode obviously I'd like to thank Sutton Images for their use of the images as usual. They allow me to tweet away with images during race weekends so that we all get to see the best technical images for the whole weekend. Obviously looking to do this sort of show every Grand Prix, and I may be able to do some ahead of the Grand Prix depending on the scenario. So I look forward to seeing you again on the next episode.